This is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I am participating in one of my favorite things, which is a celebration hop. This one is for Mel Walkden, and we're celebrating 500 subscribers on her channel, which is called Mel W Scrapping. For this hop, we could either scrap lift one of Mel's beautiful designs, or we could make a layout about somebody who has encouraged us or believed in us that we could do something that we thought we couldn't do. I absolutely love scrap lifting talented scrapbookers, so I decided that I was going to scrap lift this beautiful layout that Mel made, and there were actually two other layouts that I was strongly considering scraplifting, but I finally thought of an idea for this layout, so I decided to go ahead and choose this one. Now for this layout, I noticed that Mel had these wavy lines, and I got out my Creative Memories wavy line cutter, something I have not used in years. And I think that must have been what Mel used because our waves looked very similar. I chose 3 pattern papers and I cut them into approximately 4-inch strips, and then I used that cutter and I cut all 3 of them the same way, and those are going to be layered on top of each other the same way Mel has hers layered on her layout. I'm creating a mixed media background. I started off with a Finnabair stencil called Swirly Florals. I'm using Liquitex modeling paste and the stencil to create a textured background. I don't cover the entire background with the texture. I want it in large areas, but I also want some areas that don't have the texture as well. I'm using my palette knife to scrape some of the modeling paste away, which is so much easier when the modeling paste is still wet. I have in the past been able to scrape away dry modeling paste, but it's so much more difficult, so I always try to clean up the edges or change the edges of the modeling paste while it's still wet. I'm also using touches of this Stamperia stencil. There was some text, so I wanted to have some of that on the layout, and there were also some shapes that I wanted to include. And once again, I'm adding this to the background, but I don't want to cover up every last inch. I want there to be some areas that don't have any stenciling on it at all. So I'm being a little more conservative with this stencil since I already put so much modeling paste down using the other stencil. I think that this stenciling looks a little bit like Moroccan tiles. I like that shape. I think that it looks great along with the larger image from the Finnabair stencil. Once I apply the modeling paste, I'm going to allow it to air dry so that my paper doesn't get too crinkled too fast. I know that it will get a little wavy when I start putting the sprays on it. Here I start adding some color to the layout. You could see that I not only got inspiration from Mel's composition, but I also use her color scheme. I started off with a Shimmerz paint Vibez. The color is Here Comes the Sun. I sprayed it on the background and then I allowed it to drip a little bit, although you don't really see those drips in the final product, but I do like the look of the drips. While the background is still wet, I added some darker colors. I used a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist called Old World Brown and another one called Antique Brown, and I sprayed a little bit of each of those in a couple of places on the background, and I like the way it gives the yellowish color, kind of an antique look. For this layout, I sprayed directly onto the paper. I often use the packaging technique, but for this layout, I decided I was going to spray some of the color and then add some water. That will help the edges not to be so sharp. It will help all the colors mix together as well. In addition, it also helps the color to fade a little bit, and that is something that I wanted to do so that the background wouldn't get too dark. As of right now, the background looks very dark, but as the colors dry, they lighten up a little bit. For my mixed media backgrounds, I always use cardstock that has been coated in gesso. I learned this many years ago from Missy Whidden. She was the one who inspired me to start making mixed media backgrounds, and she always gessoed her paper. And I couldn't really understand why you would gesso paper to put watercolors on top of them, but I trusted her. I saw how beautiful her work was, so I started gessoing my paper, and now I'm so used to it that I can't make a background without using gesso. There's just a different way that the paint behaves on gesso than it does if you don't use gesso, and it's just a preference of mine. My understanding is that some people don't like to use gesso on their backgrounds because when you add color to a gessoed background, the color doesn't stay as intense as when you have a non-gessoed background. You can make the color more intense with the gesso background, but you have to build up the layers of color. One of the benefits of using a gessoed background is that the gesso creates a barrier between the paint and the paper, and that helps you to be able to manipulate the color more easily. If you want to remove some of the color, you can do that more easily with the gesso, whereas when you have a non-gessoed background, the color is absorbed right away, and that could be useful in some situations, and having a gessoed background could be useful in some situations too. It all depends on what you like and how you like to work. For example, I spilled a whole bunch of spray on the bottom of the layout and it cleaned up in a few seconds because I had the gesso. So if you're clumsy like me, you might want to try out the gesso. I actually suggest trying it both ways. Now I'm adding some wax finishes to the background. They add some shine and they also create some depth by adding some highlights to the areas that have the modeling paste. The first one that I used is a Finnabair brand. It's called Wax Matte Finish Ochre. I received that in a My Creative Scrapbook mixed media kit. I liked the way that looked, but then I wanted to use a lighter color on the darker areas. So for that one, I used some Deco Art metallic lustre in the color Champagne Ice. I add white splatters to most of my mixed media backgrounds. I really like the way they look on a colorful background. I use watered down white acrylic paint and I keep some mixed in a little container that I keep very handy. That way I don't have to mix it each time. I like a certain consistency so that the paint will splatter and spread easily. When I try to add some water to white acrylic paint on the spot, I often find that it takes me a few tries to get the right amount of water mixed in, and this just makes it much easier for me. Now I'm going back to those strips of paper and I'm inking the edges with some Distress ink in black soot. The pattern papers that I'm using were taken from an envelope that I have in my stash of Halloween themed pattern papers. They didn't have the branding strips on them. I think that the paper that has the intricate pattern is a Bow Bunny paper. I do not know the manufacturers of the other two papers. I really liked the way Mel had a pattern paper and then a light colored paper and then another darker tone behind that. I think that the lighter paper in the center really makes the other two layers pop, so I layered my papers in the same way. I cut the strips of paper a little bit wider than I thought I was going to use. I thought I would decide how wide to make them once I had the mixed media background completed. I trimmed each of those pattern paper strips down a little bit, leaving the strip on the bottom a little bit larger than the one on the top. I was thinking that the background could use a little bit more of that metallic luster, so I added that before I attached down the pattern papers. And now I'm using some ATG adhesive and I am attaching those strips down to the background. The photo that I'm using for this layout was taken in a museum in Salem, Massachusetts called the Peabody Museum. We were on a Halloween themed weekend in Salem, Massachusetts. So I decided a long time ago that even though not everything that we did was Halloween themed, I was going to make the entire album Halloween related. So for this layout, you're going to see some touches of Halloween, even though the picture really doesn't have any clear relationship to Halloween. There was an exhibit in the museum of this beautiful furniture that both of my girls absolutely loved. They took a selfie in the mirror of the piece of furniture you could see in the picture. I thought that that was a really cute picture. Even though I really like this picture, for some reason it's one of the last pictures that I have to scrapbook in this album. I have 90% of this scrapbook complete and I just have a couple more layouts to do. So I'm trying to get myself to finish up this album. I don't know why I tend to go from one album to the next and not get one done, especially when I'm so close to finishing it the way I'm close to finishing this one. Hopefully I'll have it finished soon. I'm using a paper house sticker for the title. It says Spooktacular. I didn't like the skull that was on the bottom of this sticker. It just looked a little bit too cheesy, and I have no problem with something looking cheesy, but it just didn't go along with the rest of this layout. So I decided to use some My Mind's Eye stickers and layer them on top of where the skull was. I think that those look much better and go along better with the layout. I trimmed my photo, which was 4 by 6 inches, down to 3.5 by 5 3/4 inches. I mounted on some white cardstock and then again on the same brown pattern paper that I used in the first layer of those layered waves that are on the layout, and I distressed and inked the edges of the brown mat. Mel had a number of leaves on her layout, so I decided to do the same thing on mine. I'm using some black leaves that I got from the home decor section of either Michael's or Joann's during the Halloween season. I was then thinking that I wanted to add another layer to the matting around the photo. I had already put some fun foam behind the photo. I was thinking that I could try to peel it up, but it's a little hard to peel up. It's very, very sticky. So I decided to just go ahead, cut a matzo size, distress the edges and ink them up, and then place it behind the photo with the foam on it. And that ended up looking just fine. I put some ATG adhesive on the foam, and then I bent down some of the corners just to further distress those edges. Then I attached the photo down to the background. I put the photo on the right-hand side of the layout because the furniture in the photo is leaning to the right, and when I put it on the left-hand side, it just didn't look good. So I thought that it would look better leaning to the right on the right-hand side of the page. I took 2 of the black leaves off of the layout. I just didn't like the way they looked. I just thought that they looked very flat. And then I took one of the leaves that's the same as the one I have to the left of the photo, and I cut it into smaller pieces, and I thought that those looked like individual leaves, so I used those to embellish the page. I used an EK Success photo corner punch, and I cut out some photo corners out of that same pattern paper that I have on the top layer in the background. Then I looked through my stash for a while to try to find some elements that I thought would coordinate well with the colors and the style of the page. I found some small sentiments. One says 31 cents, one says spooky day. I attached those on the upper right-hand side of the layout. I used a tag that's also a sticker from the My Mind's Eye sticker pack that I had out. I use a circular piece of chipboard that's from a Tim Holtz Halloween collection, as is the 31-cent sentiment. There was also a bat that is hanging upside down that I wanted to include on the layout. At first I thought I would put it to the left of the tag, but then later on I move it to the other side of the layout. I also added in some smaller leaves. They were branches from one of those picks that you could get in Joann's or Michael's. I like the idea of having the larger leaves and then these smaller branches. I just cut little pieces of them off of the stem and spread those in a couple of different places around the page. In the fall, I look forward to the big craft stores putting out their Halloween merchandise. I always look through all of the florals and find leaves and branches that I think would look nice on mixed media scrapbooking layouts. I just noticed as I was voicing this video over that I wish I had angled the leaf on the right down a little bit more. It's just a detail, but I think that it would have helped to create a little bit more of a consistent angle between the leaf on the left and the leaf on the right-hand side of the page. I notice that when I am voicing over videos, I often see things that I didn't see while I was making the layout. And while you might not make videos of your layouts, you can still take a little break, walk away, and come back to your layout. You could even take a look at it the next day, or you could take a photo of it. And I think that those things help me to look at my layouts a little bit more objectively and spot problem areas that I would like to fix. A lot of times I won't put any kind of wet glue on my layouts because I want the option of being able to move things around, and I find that given a little bit of time and a little bit of distance from the layout, I can look at my design a little more objectively and then make changes if I want to. I use some heavy matte gel medium to attach the leaves down to the layout. That's a strong adhesive. I wanted to break up the areas where I had the black leaves. I just thought that I wanted to mix another color in. So I looked through my stash of leaves and I found that I had some orange leaves and some yellow leaves that I thought would make a nice addition to the layout, and I began tucking them into the clusters in a few different places. And then as I was adding the leaves, it made me realize that I wanted to have the darker, heavier leaf on the left-hand side of the cluster. Even though I had already added some gel medium to those leaves, it hadn't dried yet, so I was able to switch them around. I continued to move those smaller yellow leaves around the layout until I was happy with the arrangement. You can't know how something's going to look till you try it, so I like to try different possibilities just to see how they're going to look. I added a chipboard bat on top of the title cluster. I also added another one of those branches with the small black leaves to the left-hand corner. I added some orange rhinestones to the photo corners. I always like to add some little detail to the photo corners. And then I added them in a few more places around the layout just to add a little bit of sparkle. I added some jewels to the sentiments and to the bottom part of the tag. And then later on, I believe off camera, I added another orange jewel to the top of the tag. I wanted to add some white splatters to the embellishments on the page. So I used a piece of acetate and protected my photo. And then I began to add the splatters to those large clusters. I found that the white splatters soaked up into the leaves a little bit. They were kind of fuzzy around the edges of the ones that were on the leaves anyway. But I ended up really liking the way that that looked. It just looked very natural. Earlier, I got kind of a blob of white paint on the large leaf to the left of the photo. I was able to just really quickly wipe it away and then add a little bit of water with a paintbrush, and that totally got rid of it. I find that you can usually get rid of white splatters from almost anything if you wipe them away fast enough. Of course, if the surface is really porous, that makes it a little more challenging, but I really have never had a problem with being able to remove a white splatter from something. As a finishing touch, I'm adding some black sequins to the leaves. I didn't want to add another color, but I thought that this would just add another little element to the page. I'm using some glossy accents to adhere those down. I find that glossy accents is a great adhesive for things like sequins. That is the last touch, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video, everybody, and for celebrating Mel Walkden's milestone of 500 subscribers on YouTube with her. Congratulations to Mel. In the description box, you'll find a link to Mel's channel and to her video for today. You will also find links to all of the other scrapbookers who are taking part in this celebration. Don't forget to check out all of Mel's videos. She has a great channel with so many wonderful videos on it. There are definitely lots of great process videos there for you to watch. I hope you have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.